Hello, my name is Jake Nevin. My group did the crime data set within the United States from years 1980 to 2014. Our project analyzes U.S. crime trends using the United States crime data set, which includes crime records from cities across the country. Crime is a major issue that affects public safety, community well-being, and overall quality of life, making it important to understand not just the total numbers, but also where and how the crimes changed over time. By looking at patterns over a long period, we can gain insights into trends, area of high risk, and potential factors that may influence crime. Our research specifically explores the cities and states where crimes have occurred from 1980 to 2014, as well as the types of crimes reported during that time. By examining these patterns, we aim to highlight key insights that can help inform decisions for public safety, policy planning, and crime prevention strategies. Understanding these trends allows communities and policymakers to make more informed, data-driven choices. The U.S. crime data set itself is a large collection of crime reports from cities and states across the United States. Over this 34-year period, it contains 636,454 rows and 24 columns, covering important information such as crime types, locations, and basic time data like year and month. While it does not include full date time details for each crime, it still provides enough geographical information to study national trends and compare regions over time. This data set was published on Kaggle by the United States federal government, and its size and nationwide scope makes it especially useful for analyzing long-term crime trends and differences between cities and states. With this data, we can explore how crime patterns have shifted over decades, identify areas with persistent challenges, and provide a foundation for research that can ultimately support safer communities and more effective crime prevention efforts.
So I'm going to be going over our analysis process. And this was examining long-term patterns in homicide data across the United States. So my group, we began with, we tried to do a comprehensive review of the data set, and then we tried to do a systematic cleaning process after that. So we kind of addressed things such as missing age values, we corrected inconsistent categorical labels, and we removed invalid or miscoded entries. So this kind of helped us establish a clean and reliable data set, which, is necessary for all of our subsequent analysis. So once we had the data standardized, we generated descriptive statistics to kind of develop an initial understanding of the overall patterns in the data set. So these summaries kind of guided the direction of our kind of deeper, more like exploratory work. So we went on to examine temporal trends. We were analyzing changes both year by year and across the decades. So this allowed us to identify broader historical, fluctuations in the homicide levels, as well as periods that can be characterized by increases or decreases. And this kind of understanding of these patterns helped us more contextualize the other findings in our study. So, a major component of our work involved assessing victim demographics. So, we evaluated age, race, sex, distributions to kind of determine which populations were most affected. These demographic insights kind of reveal to us there's some notable disparities and kind of underscored the need to consider social and structural factors when interpreting homicide patterns. And then, if it'll let me go to my next slide. So we also analyzed weapon types, focusing on categories, most frequently associated with homicide incidents. Kind of helped us more identify like the predominance of certain weapons, and just kind of helped us get a better understanding of behavioral patterns and potential areas for like intervention. So, some of the geographic variation was another central focus. By comparison, the homicide counts across the states and the major counties, we kind of identified areas with particularly high concentration of cases. These patterns kind of suggested that local context must play like some sort of meaningful role in shaping those homicide levels. So to evaluate the investigative outcomes, we kind of calculated some clearance rates, which measured the proportion of homicide cases that are solved. And examining these rates across the regions and demographic categories kind of provided more additional insight into the variations in criminal justice responses. So, and then kind of like to Finally, we used a simple regression model to kind of estimate the direction and strength of long-term trends. This like statistical approach kind of helped us confirm whether the patterns we observed represented uh, sustained movement over time rather than just kind of short-term fluctuations. So throughout the project, we kind of relied on visualizations, and just repeative kind of quantitative checks to reduce any interpretive bias, and just make sure that our conclusions were grounded in the evidence. So, in summary, our group's analysis offered a structured, data-driven kind of overview of the homicide trends, demographic impacts, geographic concentrations, sort of the investigative outcomes, and just kind of laid the groundwork for future research in the underlying causes and potential policy implications of these findings. And now I'm going to pass it on to my next group member.
My name is Bodie O'Brien, and I'm going to be talking about some of the findings of our presentation. So for our first figure, the bar chart compares total reported crimes across several major U.S. cities. Our biggest takeaway as a group was that New York sits at the top, as you can see, with the highest number of crimes, and Dade follows right behind it. This pattern makes sense when you think about population density and urbanization. Larger cities tend to have more concentrated populations, which leads to more economic equality and also more opportunities for crime. So this visualization isn't just showing raw numbers, it's also highlighting how geography and population play a role. Next, figure two breaks down crime incidents by victims' race and sex over a 10-year period from 2000 to 2014. A couple of trends stand out here. First, white and black victims consistently make up the majority of the reported cases throughout this timeline. Other racial groups are represented much less often in the data. Second, both male and female victims are affected, but the distribution shifts depending on the year and the racial group. So this chart helps show that the victimization isn't uniform. Different demographic groups experience crime at different rates and in different patterns. This kind of demographic breakdown can inform targeted prevention strategies or policy discussions. For our summary of statistics, here we have a quick statistical snapshot of annual homicide counts. The mean homicide counts across the year is about 18,242, and the median is very similar at 19 or 17,794, which tells us the distribution isn't heavily skewed at all. The lowest year in the data set is 2014 with 14,331 homicides, and the highest is 1993 with 335. That's a pretty widespread, and the standard deviation is 2,986, and that reflects the variability. These numbers show that while homicide rates fluctuate year to year, they still follow a general long-term pattern. Finally, for the regression output, it helps us understand whether homicide rates are trending up or down over time. And this is super important just for predictions and stuff like that. The slope is negative 214.14, which means that on average, homicides decreased by a little over 200 per year, which is a good thing, obviously. The intercept isn't super meaningful on its own, but the important part is that negative slope showing a long-term decline. We also have the R-squared value of 0.54, which means the model explains about 54% of the variation in homicide counts, a decent amount for social data. And since the p-value is less than 0.001, the trend is statistically significant. So overall, the regression confirms what researchers have noted for years. Homicide rates in the U.S. have generally been decreasing over time, even though certain years or cities may see spikes. Closing it all together, these visuals and statistics help build a clear picture of crime in the U.S., where it's concentrated, who it affects, and how crime trends have changed over time. Understanding these patterns is important for developing policies, allocating resources, and identifying communities that may need more support. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sydney Garrity, and today I will be presenting the results from our report. During our report, we examined many homicide patterns in the United States, ranging from 1980 through 2014, using a large and detailed data set with over 636,000 records. First of all, we found that homicides are strongly concentrated in a limited number of large urban areas and county areas throughout various cities in the United States. Our findings also revealed a clear long-term trend, which is homicides in the United States rose during the 1980s, peaked in the 1990s, and then declined steadily through the 2000s and early 2010s. We also found that these homicides disproportionately affect male and Black victims over other demographic groups. And finally, these homicides are predominantly committed with firearms and, most notably, handguns. Overall, this pattern aligns with research identifying changes in policing strategies, economic conditions, demographic shifts, and technological advances as contributors to the national decline in homicide. Unlike trends in total crime, which include millions of property and nonviolent offenses, homicide trends reflect only the most severe offenses and therefore show smaller numerical values with clearer long-term shifts. Okay, there we go. While analyzing our data, we made three very important assumptions. The first one being we assumed that our crime data is reported accurately and consistently across different cities with no discrepancies or at least very little. Secondly, assumed the data set represents a reliable sample of crime over time, even if some areas report more thoroughly than others. And finally, we are assuming that using just the year and the month is enough to spot meaningful trends, even without full date and time info.
Hello, my name is Dylan Metzger, and today I'm going to start presenting with the potential biases and cognitive errors. So for this slide, I kind of want to explain about how our own thinking can influence how we interpret data. The first bias is confirmation bias. This happens when we already have an expectation in our head, like believing crime is always going up. And then we unconsciously kind of focus only on numbers that support that belief. It can cause us to overlook the actual trends in the data set. Our second bias is the availability heuristic. This can be kind of when dramatic crimes we see on the news kind of stick in our minds and make us kind of think they're more common than they actually really are, even though the data really does show long-term declines in homicide. Media can kind of cover the worst of the worst crimes and make us feel like things are constantly getting worse every day. And then the last bias is anchoring. Once we see early high crime years, like the early 90s, we might anchor our expectations there and kind of compare everything to that point, even when the numbers really have changed. The big idea is data gives us objective patterns and intuition gives us context. So when we combine both while staying aware of these biases, we can make stronger, more balanced decisions. All right, for the practical implications. So on this slide, I'm kind of connecting our findings to actual decisions that organizations could make. One of the clearest implications is resource allocation. Since homicides are heavily concentrated in certain cities and counties, decision markers that we place could place more officers, community programs, and even support services that those high need areas rather than kind of spreading resources evenly. Another implication kind of relates to preventative strategies because firearms, especially handguns, account for such a large portion of homicides. Almost 50% of all homicides are due to handguns and targeted gun violence. So targeted gun violence kind of intervention programs or illegal firearm tracking could have a major impact. We also kind of saw demographic patterns showing certain groups in certain neighborhoods face higher homicide risks. That kind of suggests for a community-focused policies for like youth programs, joint support, or stronger partnerships between police and the local residents. Overall, our findings kind of show that data can guide where money, staffing, and policy efforts should go. Instead of guessing, kind of leaders can make that decision that reflect actual patterns based off the data instead of just spreading it evenly. All right, kind of for our miscellaneous slide, I kind of want to highlight what we found interesting and how this work kind of could expand to further future development. Something that really kind of stood out to us was how powerful visualizations are. When you're dealing with more than 600,000 homicide records, looking kind of at like raw numbers can feel overwhelming, but once we graphed the data, the big story kind of became more obvious. The rise in the late 80s and 90s and early 90s followed a kind of steady decline. Visuals kind of turned thousands of rows into something kind of intuitive. And kind of looking ahead, there were kind of several ways in this project that we could have extended it. We could have linked this with homicide data sets, with other factors like income levels, education rates, or even unemployment to kind of explore the deeper social relationships. Another direction we might have gone is trying to use simple machine learning models to predict which cities or years might face higher homicide levels in the future. So kind of overall, the project didn't just help us kind of understand past trends, it kind of opened the door to more advanced data analysis and meaningful future research that could be utilized. Thank you very much. That is the end of the presentation.